I want to make sure Joe has as much time as possible to talk about his portfolio and how he goes about all this evaluation. I think it's really important, and it's a little. I think what he does is different from a lot of other venture capital organizations.
Joe, have you studied what Clint Corver does?
Of course, yeah. So Clint and I are very good friends. We started Stanford at the same time. We were roommates for a bit, for a couple of years actually, while working at SDG. We both started SDG interning for a while. We remain good friends. His first successful angel investment was in a company you may have heard of called Starmine. And that got him on his career. So I'll take full credit for his successful VC career. Now, jokes aside, we stay in good touch, and he's been a good mentor on some of the logistical aspects. His focus is more enterprise software, and I'm going beyond that. I do that as well, but into life sciences, medical devices, therapies, digital health, et cetera. And we're swapping, we swap notes on our approaches. So in the world of venture capital, there's these two guys off in the corner, Clint and Joe, and they're more similar than different compared to the rest. And then if you want to dive in, we can talk about some nuanced differences.
Yep.
Yes.
Great. Well, sadly, this is the prettiest slide in the presentation, so it'll just get uglier from here. But thanks very much for the opportunity. And yeah, the title is Applying Decision Analysis to Early Stage Investing. And so, this is not a pitch. There's a disclaimer. Outline, I'll briefly touch on my background. Brian touched on it. I'll fill in some blanks. And then I'll share some interesting data, real data, outcome data for early stage investments from one large angel group. And that leads, by analyzing that data, it leads directly to some implications for portfolio construction of early stage companies. Then I will, based on that, I built an investment process shaped by decision analysis and decision quality principles. And then I will end with an example of a recent real investment. We'll talk through the probabilities and possibilities, and I'll leave hopefully plenty of time for questions. Feel free to ask questions as we go, I guess. Yeah, we'll see how it goes. So I break my background into 3 quick chapters. First was Stanford engineering economic systems, now management science engineering, where my focus was decision analysis. And I took 2 years to do the 1-year master's. You could call me slow or you could call me thorough, but that second year allowed the opportunity to TA with Ron. And went off to Strategic Decisions Group, 3 great years there, co-founded the Decision Company with Clint and others. And key, of course, to decision consulting is helping clients quantify and make big bet, long-term risky decisions. And I'll pause on that because it's a lot like early stage investing. And so for chapter 2, I left some of the decision analysis behind. It was in the background, but it was executing on my own startup. And Starmine, we objectively measured the performance of Wall Street analysts. It was a great 10-year project. We developed and sold alpha and risk analytics to mutual funds and hedge funds. And so the operating experience as a CEO was fantastic and also helpful now as I go forth as a venture capitalist, both seeing the raising of money, but possibly the most interesting is the interviewing of literally 1,000 different candidates, more applied than that, and were screened out before they got to me, hiring only about 1 in 5 of the people I saw, and et cetera, all the stuff you would normally do as a CEO. But that experience hiring really helps. And so one of the mistakes I made, and I'm happy to talk about my successes, I'm happy to talk about my lessons learned. One of the lessons learned was, in my earlier angel investments, I dug in and I did my homework, and I really liked the technology, and I really liked the market. And the CEO was really green, and the team was really green, and they were a little bit techie focused. And I said, well, I was a first-time CEO, and I figured it out. So maybe it's not that hard. And well, it turns out to be hard. And so I go back to taking that hat, that hiring hat of saying no to 4 out of 5. I take the frame now of, if this were my idea, that is now being presented, would I be excited that this CEO was available to take my idea to fruition, or would I be trying to backsteer him and no, maybe you should do it this way more? And so that hiring mentality from Starmind days comes forward to this. And chapter 3 is more today. I've been a full-time seed stage investor, occasionally since 2011, but then 100% since 2017. I've made over 40 early stage investments just personally, own checkbook, and had successes, and have had successes and lessons learned, and some of the stories are still unfolding. And now launching a venture capital firm called Seedfolio. And the idea is a large portfolio of seed stage investments. Okay, but enough about me. Let's talk about some data. So we'll talk about the outcome data from early stage investments from One Angel Group. And then while I'm showing this One Angel Group, there are many other studies out there, and the data kind of converge on similar chances of failures and the similar skewed nature of the distributions. And we'll talk about the implications for portfolio construction. So I'm a member of several angel groups, one of which is called Tech Coast Angels. There's 450 members based in Southern California. San Diego chapter is about half of that membership. And so they did a very thorough analysis recently where they went through all their investments that they've made, where like 2 or more members participated, and they looked at those that were exited. So many of the investments are still in process, and the companies may be growing or maybe faltering. Regardless, they looked only at the ones that have had exits, so we avoid the kind of ongoing bias. And of those, there was 182 that have had exits. Either the company went out of business as a failure, sold at a fire sale, had an IPO, had an acquisition. Of those 182 companies, if you had invested in all of them, on average, you would have averaged a 4.9x return. So put that differently, if you had invested $25,000 into each of those deals that are now shut down or exited, you would have invested $4.6 million, and you would have returned $22.4 million, or a 4.9x return. Maybe a little bit better than most angel groups, but roughly in line. However,
Joe,
yes.
Are you willing to take questions along the way?
Sure.
Do you know what the average time frame was for that 4.9x return?
The exact average I don't know, but it was in the 7 to 10 year time frame. And they look at the data several ways, and there's a correlation between size of outcome and length of time held.
Thank you.
Yeah, if I can pull up the data, and I'll try to make a note and circle back to you on that. So
No, not
TCA
necessary, Joe. That's
time.
the 7 to
Okay.
10 is
Okay.
good.
Okay. So, however, as good as those were, the returns were driven by 3 big home runs. And if you missed those 3, or if you missed all 3 of those, your return was only 1.4x. So put it differently, 1.6% of deals produced 71% of returns. And so this is just showing all 182, and if you're sorted by return, so this is over 250x, just under 250x, and under 150x. And 20x is certainly a fantastic outcome, but just it's dwarfed by these deals, and these deals would produce 71% contribution to that 4.9x overall return. So this is a home run or a grand slam type of endeavor. Just looking at the same data slightly different way is 125 of 182 deals, or 69%, lost money. They returned 0x to 1x. Just 1x would be getting your money back, but no profit. 15% were 1x to 3x. 14% were, the Zoom bar is hiding from me. Let's see if I can move this out of the way. Let me get it up there. 14% were 3x to 20x, and that 1.6x rounded here to 2%. 1.6% rounded here to 2% returned 100x or more. And so, okay, so the skewness of the distribution has very important implications, and the first one is for portfolio construction. Early stage investing dictates the need for large portfolios. So we'll look at it 2 ways, because this is SDP. We'll take a look at Bernoulli Trials, and then we'll look at Monte Carlo. So from a Bernoulli trial, if we're just asking, like if I flip a 50-50 coin, how many times, what's the chance of getting, one head, et cetera. This is, if it wasn't a coin, but if we had a Bernoulli trial with a 1.6% chance of success, calling that an outlier, like a 100x. And if I varied portfolio size, if I had a portfolio of 10 investments sampled from this pool, I'd have about a 15% chance of having one or more of those be an outlier. If I go up to 40, I get to almost 50%. And if I get to 45, I get to just over 50% chance of having at least one outlier. So this is one dimension of the rationale for a larger portfolio. You're trying to increase the chance of getting those really outsized returns. Another way of coming at this is with a Monte Carlo simulation. And so I took that TCA distribution of deals, the same slide that I showed before, and I kept it simple, just discretized it. Apologies to Tom Keelan, I did not convert it to metalog functions. And so I ran the Monte Carlo. And so if we take an example, typical VC size, portfolio size, maybe 20 investments. And so this represents, these three lines represent 10,000 portfolio runs, and the outcome of those portfolios is an overall return. And the green line corresponds to the chance of getting 3x overall portfolio return or better. The blue is 2x and the gray is 1x. So with a 20 company portfolio with a distribution of sampling of 10,000 of these, 10,000 such portfolios, there's a high chance of, 80% chance of getting 1x or better, not losing money. There's a 45% chance of getting 2x or better, and a 30%-ish chance of getting 3x or better. If we focus on the green line and talk about the chance of getting 3x or better, which is what I'd like to accomplish, when we get to 40 deals, we had a 50% chance of getting 3x or better. And if we go up to 80 deals, we'd get a 70% chance of 3x or better. Now, the expected value of all those portfolios is the same, but the median changes. And as you have a very skewed distribution and you have a larger collection of them, you're just more likely, the median portfolio is more likely to have the higher returns. So those two ways of looking at it help suggest a larger portfolio. And so some people look at this and say, well, why don't you have 100 portfolio? Well, there is, that was a theoretical construct. In reality, there are so many hours in a day to look at companies and do a quality decision analysis process on it. There's keeping the bar high, and so there's some practical constraints about why not have a larger portfolio. So one implication of the data that we started off with is that portfolio construction guides you towards a larger portfolio, and the other is making smarter bets. I'd like to do better than Tech Coast Angels does at the distribution, kind of shift the returns to the right, if you will, and to do that, designed an investment process shaped by both decision analysis and decision quality principles. So again, back to those implications, we talked about overall portfolio construction. Now we'll talk about individual deal selection. So putting the other data a different way, the few winners must be large enough to carry the losers. A strong process can help ensure decision quality. A reward to risk analysis, like decision analysis, is a super valuable tool. And perhaps most importantly, and we'll talk about this in more detail as well, risk analysis must be grounded in, or probability assessments must be grounded in, the real world of high failure rate. You can't just sit there and say, well, yeah, 70% of deals fail, but this one's 90% chance of success. You're probably deluding yourself. So I'm going to process, I'll walk through it super quickly, but I wanted to tie the process I've developed back to dimensions of decision quality. I thought that might be a fun exercise. And so the steps in the process are source, screen, analyze, quantify, verify, invest, and support. And so here we're in sourcing, and I usually describe how my approach is very aggressive sourcing, and this ties to decision quality, the generation of creative alternatives. your ultimate decision, your ultimate course of action is bounded by the quality of your best decision, your best alternative. And so to do that, I'm in multiple angel groups. I'm a member of Tech Coast Angels, as I mentioned, Stanford Angels, the Northern California, Southern California, and I'm starting a San Diego chapter, co-founding a San Diego chapter. I've been invited, other angel groups see my write-ups. I've been invited to Life Science Angels, Chemical Angels, Pasadena Angels, et cetera. So the angel groups are a great source of deals and experts. Some of my entrepreneurs that I've funded to date have been successful, had good outcomes, then they go into angel land and they share deal flow. I go to biotech conferences like Biotech Showcase, BioInvestor Forum, and there's a lot of university commercialization groups spinning out here of UCSD, incubators and accelerators. And so I source aggressively. I think 1 week in October, I saw 40 pitches in 1 week, and followed up for an hour conversation with 4 of those, and one of those brought forward to a decision. So next would be screening, and then this quick initial screen with that big funnel, you need to quickly screen, and to do so, you need an appropriate frame, right? Or you need to be clear on your values and trade-offs. It's easy. There's so many deals out there. It's easy to get distracted by things off thesis. Now, when I was doing this individually, there was no hard and fast thesis. As I go forward into starting a VC firm, I'm holding myself out there as pursuing certain types of deals. So we need to stay in that frame. So we're looking for leading edge, so seed stage, I like to say Series A evidence, but not yet Series A obvious. So not pre-seed where it's a few folks and a business plan and a good idea, but at least MVP, minimum viable product, some sales, some really solid preclinical or clinical data if it's biotech. So that's the stage. Leading edge technology with clear impact, solving some important problem in health and longevity. Could be therapies, devices, diagnostics, or digital health. And opportunistically evaluate solutions to other important human problems. An AI company doing image processing of photos taken by drones of assets like PG&E or SCG&E, energy assets, and finding 28 different types of faults algorithmically 100 times faster than humans can. So, different, outside of health and longevity, there's I could go into, you can look at the website also and see examples of other things I've invested in. Large risk-adjusted return is the single bottom line as far as clear values and trade-offs. So doing quick estimates at this point, early in the process, we're going for a risk-adjusted 10x multiple or 40% probability-weighted IRR. And we'll talk about that in more detail. Analyze, I'll speed up a little bit here. We analyze deeply across 4 main risk domains: product, market, team, and economics. And depending on the deal, some are more important than others. So for a software company, doing enterprise software, it's really not a question of can we get the software to work. It's really more of a question, will anyone care? It's really the product market fit that's the bigger uncertainty and unknown there. Whereas for a potential cure to pancreatic cancer, the market's pretty clear. The bigger question is, will this work? Team and economics are consistent to both of them. And so this, starting to dive into the story, starting to shape the story, really hits on the DQ dimension of reliable information. And it's also a matter of balanced inquiry and value of information, because there's endless research you could do on a deal. At some point you've got to cut it off. And right now we want to cut it off early to see if it even comes close to passing the hurdle. So the hurdles are here when we start to quantify it. We explicitly quantify the expected value or the probability weighted returns. And from a decision quality point of view, logical correct reasoning or decision analysis, of course, where we quantify the key risk, we calculate probability weighted returns, and we only invest if the probability weighted multiple is 10x or more, or if the probability weighted IRR is 40% or more. Now there's a tree over on the right to distract you and suck you in. Ignore that. We're going to come back to this section and unpack this quite a bit, because for this group, I thought that would be most interesting. I'm just taking a quick run through the process overall. Verify, if it's looking good and it's at or above the near or above the threshold. Want to verify some of the assumptions we've been making along the way to say, okay, well let's make sure the story pans out. And this is back to reliable information, balanced inquiry, and value of information. We verify the company. It could be the revenue. You'd be surprised what different startups call revenue. Enthusiasm of the customers and product market fit, market size, the science, and the team and the board, as ones I'm learning to do more these days than I did in the early days. And understand the governance and the structure there. And then in addition to verifying the company, then I try to verify my own understanding. So I'll write a deal memo, 10 to 20 pages typically, to clarify with some pictures in it, to clarify my thinking. I'll engage a devil's advocate to understand the weak points of the analysis and try to avoid confirmation bias. So, commitment to action, I don't have a clear map to my process. If anywhere commitment to action would slot into the process, it would be here. This would be the point that if I had venture partners, fellow managing directors of a venture capital firm, this is where we would talk about it as a group to get to commitment of action. In my case, it's commitment to personal action and getting enough confidence to write the check. And bouncing it off of others after having written it up is a valuable way to do that from a quality point of view. The last two are really more implementation, so I'm going to go super fast. The investment, the actual pulling of the trigger, there's negotiations involved. There's I prefer priced equity rounds like a Series C as opposed to notes or SAFE. And there's some tax and other advantages of that structure. And people think it's a lot more expensive, but it's not really. And then support. We ensure good governance, we make sure that the board is properly construed, and provide mentoring when applicable. There's times when I can add value to a company based on my CEO experience, maybe a tech founder who needs some insight into building a sales organization, but there's times where I can't add any value at all other than writing the check. I invested in an in vivo CAR T company, and I'm not going to be able to help them. Maybe a few introductions to some larger biotech VCs that I know for their Series A and Series B. And so if you're bored and shut in during COVID and you want a 20 or 30-minute walkthrough of each of those dimensions, you can visit our website under the process tab and you can get gory detail. But at this point, I just want to circle back on the quantify tab. This is SDP after all. And so I thought it would be appropriate to dive in there in more detail and talk about the decision analysis a little bit more. So we could explicitly quantify expected or probability weighted returns. And we talked about this a bit before. We only invest where the probability weighted multiple is 10x or more. And Carl asked, am I familiar with what Clint's doing at Ulu? And I'd say yes. And that first line would match with what he's doing. The second one is different, where they don't have the IRR. So if it doesn't meet the 10x hurdle, in my case, I see a lot of biotech, or not the therapies, but on the devices and the diagnostics, with clear, plausible visibility on a 2 to 3 year exit. I just exited one, Paradigm Diagnostics, 11 months after my investments for 2x. I thought it would go longer and be a bigger return, but it's still a 90% IRR. I'm very happy with that. And there's, all 10x returns are not created equal, and all 5x returns are not created equal. So the 40% IRR corresponds to a probability weighted multiple invested capital of like 2x in 2 years, 4x in 4 years, 7.5x in 6 years, approximately. And so so it's going to end up in a decision tree, and we're familiar with how to construct those. But from the qualitative overlay, I want to add a few things. And the biggest one is avoiding garbage in and garbage out. The calculations, multiplying possibilities times probabilities is not the hard part. It's believing the quality of your decision basis. And so, we need to be grounded in the reality of early stage. As I started out with, this deal, we have to start with a prior that this deal is like the other 182 with a 70% chance of losing money. And there has to be a really compelling case to think otherwise. Or this drug entering the clinic that we're thinking of backing is like the other thousands with just a 12% chance of FDA approval. Those are data to kind of bring you down from the optimism of this looks like the next greatest thing since sliced bread. However, you're not going to use those flat probabilities across the board for everything. The approach has to allow for updating of these priors based on deal-specific judgments or data. So for some examples, the total addressable market is extremely large. And if this does work, it has a chance of being one of those 100 or 2x outliers. Or the demonstrated product market fit is really solid with this tech company. We've already, they already have $500,000 of real ARR, annual recurring revenue, that's growing at a very healthy clip of 60% year over year. Or in a medical arena, the efficacy and safety have already been demonstrated in humans, and that's rare that we see those. But in some of the more interesting deals, get to see some human data before investing. Those usually drive those three usually drive some of the probabilities that are key to the analysis. But there's other parameters that drive the ultimate multiple. The deal price obviously drives the multiple. Future deletion needed is going to drive the outcome multiple. And competition in the space. If the market size is so big, how many mouths is that market going to feed and be divided up among? And so specifically for biotech, I've got papers and bibliography I can send you if anyone's interested. But the probability of approval, or specifically the probability, having begun phase 1 clinical trials, what's the probability it gets through to a FDA approval or BLA equivalent? The overall probability is about 12%, but it varies by therapeutic area, with a low of about 4% for cancer. Again, these just start informing the priors. So if you say this is going to cure pancreatic cancer, and there's a 80% chance of this working, you're probably smoking something that's not even regulated in California. So but taking that 12% and decomposing that, one thing I did further, which is I think somewhat novel, I triangulated on a bunch of aspects of the literature, and there's a lot of literature, a lot of research done on clinical trials, and I wanted to decompose it into probability of safe, effective, and and execution. And there's lots of studies that say the fraction of trials that failed because the therapy was deemed to be too toxic, or it wasn't toxic, but it failed because it wasn't effective, or it failed not because of safety or efficacy, but it failed for some other reason, often unknown, often the company running out of money. So one way or the other, we put that in the failure to execute bin. And so decomposing that based on, again, triangulating data from the literature, it's more likely to be safe than effective. So about a 60% chance of safe times 25% effective times 80% chance that the team can execute would lead to a 12% probability of approval. Now, why go through that? What's the so what of that? This decomposition allows updating of specific risks based on the specifics of the therapy or company that you're looking at. So, for example, I invested in a company a year or two ago using a molecule called Epsilon in oral form. It's been already provided to others in a completely unrelated indication, some ear indication. They're using it to combat C. difficile, a nasty bacteria affecting the colon, especially in old people, especially in post antibiotic treatment. And it's highly deadly. Anyway, so it's actually treating it as an antitoxin and not as an antibiotic. And so completely different indication. However, here we're starting with something that's been dosed to thousands of patients, and we know it's safe. So if we did nothing else to update the tree, we could take that probability of safety from 60% to, let's say, 99%. In another example, so my biggest home run is a company called Lubris. And when I first saw them, they had done a very limited proof of concept trial in Europe, and it wasn't, FDA sanctioned, and it wasn't GLP, GMP. However, the data were pretty compelling, and they had dosed 30 patients, and they had fairly remarkable results. And, with my StarMind days, I'm pretty good at looking at data. And I said, that seems impressive, combined with the fact that they've learned how to bioengineer something that's naturally occurring in our bodies and in our eyes. And so it's probably safe as well. But having seen it work in people and knowing it's already in our bodies can lead you to think a higher chance of safety and higher chance of efficacy. And so I won't go into gory detail, but I tailor the models to be domain specific. So in technology, the dark ones would be explicit factors in my model, and the lighter ones more you think of as evocative nodes, and the dotted ones are more deterministic calculations. You know, as I talked about, product, will it work? Market fit, will they buy? Sales and ops, can it scale? Can it scale? Can the fundamental business model scale? Not will this team scale it? Because I model that independently as a team. Can they pull it off? And so on. You know, it gets to a probability of success, and then a market share times a TAM gets to sales. And, you know, exit multiple based on the margins of this kind of business can lead to exit value. And then the current valuation and future dilution combined with exit value and the current valuation leads to multiple invested capital. Similarly, but different in biotech, we might look at preclinical data to understand probability of safety and safety and efficacy. And ultimately it comes down to, are they going to get an approval? And this is not always the model. Sometimes it's very clear in the example I give in a few moments. The success doesn't depend on an FDA approval because their whole strategy is to sell after a successful first-in-human trial. But you know, fitting it to the case, then the market share and the total addressable market, and looking at market care. What's the standard of care today? What's the relative performance of this therapy to the standard of care? Do they have intellectual property that's going to help them protect market share? Go to clinicaltrials.gov. Are there other competitors or future competitors in clinical trials currently? And so the market share and total addressable market leads to a peak sales. And sometimes we do NPV models from the acquiring pharmaceuticals company's point of view. But for simplicity here, we'll talk about an exit multiple times the peak sales as it gives an exit value. And again, current valuation and future dilution matter as well. So the nice thing about this is one of the things that Tech Coast Angels, for example, life science angels, is there have been deals where we'd explicitly agree on the probabilities, and I would invest and someone else wouldn't due to different risk tolerance. And so what I've learned in terms of harnessing experts is let them speak to what they have got knowledge about, and not to the overall investment decision or the overall financial calculations where that may not be their expert. So end with a real investment, and then this is essentially the last slide, and then open it for questions. May 2020, so not quite a year ago. This is COVID times. And the company with a medical device for atrial fibrillation. So atrial fibrillation, some of you may know, affects 33 million people worldwide. The drugs, there's antiarrhythmias drugs, but they mostly don't work very well. There are drugs like anticoagulants because people with atrial fibrillation are at a higher chance of stroke because the way the blood vortices within the heart. But so medicines aren't really a great option here. When it gets bad enough, when it stays persistent enough, the standard of care is a catheter ablation. So they go up through a vein in your leg, they go up to the heart, they do some mapping, and then they systematically burn some of your muscle cells to remove some pathways for stray electrical signals. So that's the standard of care. Very high failure rate, very high need to try that all over again. About 400,000 of those procedures, a year, setting the low bar on the market. And so what these guys have was a electronic device, super small, actually wireless. So no, just like your Sonicare might charge wirelessly, wireless RF receiver inside the heart. They'll go into the vein to implant it, and that receiver will sit. It's a little bigger. It'll sit in the coronary sinus, and then an offshoot of the coronary sinus is a vein that bumps up against the left atrium, and that's called the vein of Marshall. And they've got this tiny little string of microelectrodes in there, and they can basically give the heart a shock from that location, and that location is key. Others have tried shocking the atrium back into sinus rhythm. So Metrix is the company. Cardioverter was one such company, and the good news is it worked. The bad news is the shock was so large that nobody wanted it, and so that was discontinued. These guys have a way of doing it with a much lower power pulse, and so 35 millijoules instead of 1 joule, which is where the pain threshold is. So they've got these microelectronics. They've got multifaceted team involved, And one of the nicest things is the CEO is a been there, done that CEO, where he had one exit to Medtronic for 250+ million. And at the time of investment, he had a company that he had led in the early days as a technical founder. They needed a commercial CEO. He stepped aside. They brought in a commercial CEO, and that company ended up IPOing Acutus shortly after this investment. The lockup's coming off soon here. Anyway, so it's a successful CEO with a great track record. So that's a little bit of the background. Looking in to build the quality information basis, I had a heart surgeon colleague from Tech Coast Angels who was happy to check in, who got into the gory details of the science with me. 3 med tech product executives, including someone whose specialty was working on atrial fibrillation at Medtronic, a likely acquirer, and 2 IP attorneys on this one. And we got into the IP, which would be critical. And for this one, IP is not always as critical. Did some back channel references on the CEO, and I analyzed data sets from early experiments. So they had data from pigs, and they actually had some early data from humans. And so I'll pause there kind of as the background. Then it comes to a tree, and this is going to be fairly familiar. But the 3 biggest risks were, one of the product managers said they can probably do this. However, what they're doing, getting that little electronics up there in the vena Marshall, getting it to stay with some stent-like device is some tricky engineering. It's probably doable, but it could be a 20% chance that they get there and they just can't make the form factor work. FIH stands for First in Human Success. And the strategy here is to, and is a lot of precedent for this in this space, in the heart space. The strategy here is to get it to a first in human success, which means successfully implant the product into 25 people in a proper FDA trial. And based on those results, the Medtronics and Abbotts of the world would very likely want to acquire it. They have no intention for building a sales force for this particular company. And so the question is, can they get to a successful first in human trial? And that's really, will it work? Can, they've got grant money and they've got a runway and they've got some R&D to do, but in the end, will they be able to insert the string of electrodes and be able to reliably convert atrial fibrillation patterns in patient to sinus rhythm? And so the heart surgeon thought what they're doing was totally logical and bang on. He gave it a 50-50 chance of success just based on other efficacies. Well, it seems promising, and they've got efficacy data, limited though, in pigs and humans. I brought that down to about 33%. And then can they finance and execute? My kind of standard for this would be 80%. I upped it to 90% because this is, as I mentioned, a CEO who's been there, done that. The post-1 evaluation matters. The CEO had wanted 8. They had a term sheet. COVID happened. That fell away. I said, look, I think I can raise $500,000 for you. That'll get you started on the product design that he wanted to get started on. I'd put it in 50. I'll write a note. And I think on the strength of that note and some angel colleagues, there's a good chance that there'll be follow-on. And sure enough, they ended up raising $640,000. So the post money was actually $5.64 million. And then the future dilution is 50%. And sometimes I'll treat that as an uncertain node where it's really highly uncertain. And perhaps in this case, I could have added some uncertainty. However, it went through the cost structure, the clinical plan, their budget, and they're likely going to need to raise $8 million. And there's not a ton of uncertainty around that. And since we're coming off a $5 million valuation, they've got some additional data, and they can get, let's say, an $8 million pre-money valuation. 8 on 8 would be 50% dilution. It could be a little more, a little less, but that's the order of magnitude. And so those become the key parameters. And so there's different paths through here. Of course, some of the probabilities have to equal to 100%. The probability of a path, of course, is the product of the probabilities along the path. And so the big one here is exit. And in the cardio space, even after only a first-in-human trial, 25 successful patients, there's a lot of exits in the $200 to $500 million range. Heart is a big market. However, this is but a lot of those are really minor improvements to existing technologies. This is so game changing that I thought, the heart surgeon thought, the guy from Medtronic thought, there's a reasonable shot of $1 billion or more outcome here. If they brought this to commercialization, it could go even further. And so, putting those as my 10, 50, 90s, 200 million to $1 billion to complete the story. And so now, if there was a $1 billion exit, right, with a $5 million, 5.5 post, 50% future dilution, so that $1 billion exit becomes like a $500 million exit, divided by a 5.5 probability would be a 91. 5.5 post would be a 91x return if we realized a $1 billion exit. Of course, we might realize only this exit or only this exit, or most likely these exits, right? But the big fat goose eggs. And so, if you zoom out big picture, what we're saying is this is about a, 73, 75, roughly about a 75% chance of losing your money, and only about a 1 in 4 chance of success. And if it is a chance of success, it's maybe let's call it a 40x return. So a 1 in 4 chance of a 40x gives us about a 10 or 11x overall return. This was the only investment you're going to make this year. You may want to do it. However, in a context of building a large portfolio, 40, 50 companies, this is intelligent risk to take, in my opinion. And so that's how I've gone about building the portfolio. And so a couple of questions in the chat. Joe, do you have used historical data to set your prior on future dilution assessments? So for future dilutions, it varies. If something is more, if you look at from the early days, the dilution of an Invisalign, which is a monster runaway, taking 20% of the orthodontics market, $2 billion annual sales, but it's been a consumer-driven play, and so the dilution from early investors has been probably at the 95% level. Where the mind body, the largest outcome on the TCA data set was one where they already had 15 people, I think about $1 million revenue run rate, and were cash flow positive. They were just looking to top up to improve marketing. And so that's one where you'd comfortably model a lot less future dilution. In this particular example, I looked at the budget of what they need to do. The budget seemed reasonable, and the likely valuation, and the dollars raised divided by valuation would be the dilution. So it depends on more on the parameters of the deal. And so using, I will look at historical data of similar types of products or companies, but that's very story dependent. And sometimes it's a lot more uncertain. I tend to just use the extreme. So the biotech, I think I use the in vivo CAR T. I think I used 80% future dilution. So that's pretty much it. I'll just summarize, and then we'll go to switch gears to questions. 2 major implications of early stage outcomes. Again, the set of really skewed distributions that I showed up front really dictates the need for large portfolios. And then when you get to individual deal selection, the few winners have to be large enough to carry the losers. And so a strong process can help ensure decision quality. Decision analysis can give you a logical framework to make sure you're holding the bar high and not settling for twosies, threesies, because you need some home runs in there to compensate for the losers. And any risk analysis you do needs to be grounded, or probability assessments need to be grounded in the real world of high failure rate. So on that, happy to take questions. Looks like one, what are the statistics of your decision process funnel? How many opportunities do you consider at each stage? How many advanced? Which stages are the big cuts, and which are more confirmatory in nature? So I didn't track that in the early days. I'm starting to track that, but I would say for in a month or 2 month period, I might see, let's say in a month I might see 50 to 100 pitches in a month, and most of those are quick no's. 5 to 10 of those become an hour conversation with the CEO or founding team. 2 or 3 of those I'll look at really hard, and one of those will turn into a decision, into an investment. I'll stop sharing so I can see people better. I can call those back up if we need them.
Hey, Joe, it's Tom. It looks like you develop an individual model that's really tailored to each of these companies when you decide to go down the route of doing the full analysis. I think that's different than what Clint does, as I recall. I think he's got a single model and just sort of everything somehow fits within that. But it looks like yours are more tailored to the specifics of the individual company.
Yeah, so I've looked at his model, and there's he generally does enterprise, software, and it's a great market to be in. I love enterprise software as well, and he's decomposed it. I talked about biotech, how I decomposed it. He's decomposed that problem into Jeffrey Moore crossing the chasm framework of, are they going to have early success? Are they going to cross the chasm, and are they going to get to major market success? And he's got probabilities along the way, and he developed a baseline model so that the probabilities work out to be, consistent with the number of overall successes and failures you'd see at the different phases. There's a little, and so, he's informed it that way. That model doesn't really work for biotech, where it's really decomposing it the way I did for safety efficacy. It wouldn't make sense to talk about crossing the chasm for this biotech. So now that said, not everyone is a custom 10-hour. Let me think about how I'm going to structure. There's reusable aspects of it. I'm always looking at product, always looking at market, always looking at team, always looking at the financials. And so the kind of the backbone model is fundamentally the same, and with the parameters of dilution and follow-on rounds and so on. But the particular risks more towards the edges is what becomes a little bit more custom.
Yeah, sounds good.
Hey, Tom, this is Brian Putt. Excuse me, Joe, this is Brian Putt. Now, question for you. You reject a lot of things, say no, after 1 hour or whatever. Historically, have you seen some of those things you rejected come to fruition?
Yeah, that's known in the trade as the anti-portfolio. Do you track your anti-portfolio? And there was one that got away from me. I did due diligence. It was one of these companies that was the company was accelerating, and a bunch of people invested. I was late to the game. I was traveling somewhere with family for like a month, and I came back. I was playing catch up, and I hadn't seen the CEO pitch, and then I would be kind of last money in. And I asked the CEO, can you send me the last 3 months of sales? And he hemmed and hawed, and it looked like the sales had flatlined. And so based on that, I thought that the momentum was coming to the end, and it was a little bit of smoke and mirrors. And I didn't dive in to find out. I didn't pick up the phone and spend the hour with the CEO, partly because I hadn't had the relationship because I was out of the country when it happened. But I decided, no, I'll pass on that one. It just it didn't smell right, the slowdown in traction. Now, it could have been the slowdown in traction was because the CEO was spending all that time raising money. It could have been a personnel issue with the head of sales. So there's one where if there's enough other positive things, I shouldn't let one. I should do my homework and not be so quick to say no. That's one example. And so it's not that they're out of the woods success, but they've had a successful Series A and Series B, and they've got some good traction. So it looks like one that in hindsight, would have been nice to have been in. But there's not lots of those that I can think of. I do keep notes, and I've got an organized way on every company I see. Every company that I'll pitch decks in there, but anytime I spend the hour with a CEO, I go through my standard questions, my standard first round questions, and I'll type it up. And if it's a no, I will. I'm cognizant enough to realize that 9 months from now, this Acme widget company, I'll be fuzzy on the details or why I said no, and so I'll summarize that at the top so I can go back. And so I've been doing that over the last 3 years, and over time, as I see these big home runs, I can go into my files and say, is that one I saw? Did I, what did I miss? How did I get it wrong? Now the other is, it's harder to track the ones that die the quiet death, and I was right that they didn't really have a leg to stand on. So that would be the, both, the other type of error. So I think one came on the chat. What are a few of your people tests for CEO or team? Quants underestimate that this is the biggest factor. Yeah, as I alluded to before, that was a learning, something I didn't do enough out of the gate. I had focused on the idea and the market. Back at Starmine, I had my very standard questions for the engineer and the questions for the administrative assistant and so on, and questions for quality assurance. Really, I'm looking at, for the CEO, they have to be able to, they're not going to do everything. They've got to build the team out. And so there's got to be, well, first off, there's got to be smart. So there's got to be smarts and communication. And smarts is the crispness and the facility and the creativity of the answers. And then communication is important, because if they have a hard time communicating, they're going to have a hard time enlisting great employees. They're going to have a hard time enlisting the great investors. But then what I want is awareness of what it's going to take to build this organization. If this is the type of company that needs a direct sales force, do they have a clue of what that looks like? They don't have to have done that 3 times before, but they have to know enough to know what they know and what they don't know, and have a plan for how to get from here to there. They don't have to have the VP of sales on board, but they have to have either that person on the board who's been there and built 5 different direct sales forces before, and who's going to be holding their hand and helping them with interviewing to get them on the right track, or evidence that the important missing pieces are in place. If a CEO is just the marketing person and relying, oh, I'm going to slap together a prototype and we're off. There's got to be the technical DNA has to be in the company if it's software, and so it's not just the CEO, it's the team. The other is the board. And one mistake I made was, and I think it will still be a positive outcome, but it's been frustrating and slow along the way, and perhaps more dilution than necessary. The sales, the CEO, super amazing technical in their domain, and I verified that thoroughly. And the product was way advanced, and again, and they sounded like they knew what they didn't know. They weren't strong on finance, and they weren't strong on sales at all. And this is one where you really had to get out there and sell it. The technology had been mostly done, and after years and years of development. And so the problem is that the CEO wasn't very strong at sales, and had a board that had no sales capability. And the board were kind of fellow techies from the industry who weren't really real board members. They weren't the type who would instill governance. They weren't the type to hold the CEO's feet to the fire. So there's a company I looked at earlier this year. It broke my heart. I said, no, great technology would revolutionize and lower the cost of all antibody development, great process technology. But the CEO is really a chief science officer or chief technical officer, but really had a control issue and wanted to hold on to the reins. I called up and talked to the board members, and I said, this guy seems more like CSO, CTO type, not CEO, considering some of the strategic blunders. And they said, yeah, we kind of agree with you. I said, well, if you agree with me, has it occurred to you guys to maybe make that move? Well, it's kind of difficult, and he doesn't really want to make that move. I said, well, that tells me that the board is not competent, and there's no real governance there. So that's one where I said, look, if you guys make changes in the CEO and/or board, give me a call back, because I love the technology, but I'll take a pass for now. Let's see. Clint says he is open about his evaluation with the entrepreneur. Some of them find this contributes to their thinking, even if he passed. How much are you transparent about your approach and assessments with the entrepreneurs? Who, if anyone, finds this DA perspective valuable? I have shared the evaluation. I find that getting I share the summary level bullet point is that, look, I get to, I've had a conversation with one software startup where, I ran my numbers, I need to get to a, if everything works, yeah, you could be 100x. However, with all the risks of failure here, you look like a 7x to me, and I need to get to a 10x on a risk-adjusted basis. and at your 10 million pre-money valuation, we're not going to get there. And so they dropped it to like whatever the number was, 7 million, and and we got there. And it wasn't a lot of. There's a little bit of conversation about how I got to my number, but there wasn't a lot. I'm willing to share my detailed analysis, and I have. I don't know if I do it every single time. I'm very happy to, and yeah, and so yeah, I share my analyses, and some appreciate it, some don't, but I haven't done it super consistently, and that's I'll have to think about that one. Good question about if I hold that out as being a standard part of the process and a reason for pitching to us. I think I'm caught up on chat. Any other questions, either chat or verbal?
We've got about 3 minutes left here. Do you have any final comments you'd like to give us?
None from my side. I've already told you more than I know.
I don't think that's true. I think you know a lot more than you've shared, but that's fine. You can't share all your knowledge and all your experiences in an hour here. So, Joe, we do thank you for making the presentation and all the insights you've given us. I think we had a nice crowd here. And if there's anyone out there that would like to give a presentation, appreciate hearing from you. And I also like to accommodate or make mention that Duro who I think just put something in the chat there. He was the one that brought me to you to make a presentation. So I thank him for doing that. So others of you may know of others who are not on this call who would like to make a presentation. So if you get back to me on that, I can talk to them and see if we can make some arrangements. Any other comments from people?
Thanks for the opportunity.
Yeah, a great presentation, Joe. Very interesting.
Thanks, Tom.
Yeah, many thanks, Joe.
Thanks, Dave.